to another artist conversation in our series, Pathways for Dialogue, Past, Present, Future.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for the first in the series of 6 conversations. I am Nicole Moore. She said I'm a native New Yorker and I love art, and I'm actually good friends with Dianne, and it's been a pleasure to meet Tim this past week. Let me start off with introducing Dianne to my immediate left. Dianne Smith's career as a multidisciplinary artist began as an abstract painter over 2 decades ago. Her group and solo exhibitions include Visions for Our Future, Echoes of Our Past at the Institute of Contemporary Art at Maine College of Art and Design, The Way We Remember, and Uptown Triennial at the Wallach Art Gallery at Columbia University, and Harlem at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture. Her work also extends to costume design for the Vicksburg Project, Mabou Minds, okay. I Dream a Dream That Dreams Back at Me, a Juneteenth celebration held at Lincoln Center, and she's also responsible for set design for A Walk into Slavery at the Billie Holiday Theater. Her work is in the National Museum of Women in the Arts, the Brodsky Organization, and the Petrucci Family Foundation Collection of African American Art. In addition, her papers are in the Barnard College Library Archives and Special Collections. Smith is a Bronx native of Belizean descent. She received her master's in creative practice, her MFA from Trans Art Institute via Plymouth University, UK in Berlin, Germany. Dianne currently lives and works in Harlem, New York, right up the street. Tim, he hails from Philadelphia. Is a painter based in Philly. His abstract paintings and works on paper examine the fluid and contradictory nature of memory and place as informed by time, with an emphasis on color, multi-layered systems, and process. McFarlane's observations of the visual impact of human activity and his everyday engagement with man-made and natural environments form the basis of his work. In addition to painting, his practice includes site-specific, wall-based, mixed media installations, murals, photography, and digital experimentation. McFarlane's paintings and works on paper reside in numerous private and public collections, such as the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, the Woodmere Museum of Art, the Petrucci Family Foundation Collection of African American Art, Bucknell University, Fox School of Business at Temple University, and West Virginia University. His work is represented by the Bridget Mayer Gallery in Philadelphia. Thank you for joining us for this conversation. So what makes this, I think, this conversation unique is that both of you are abstract artists. And so I wanted to first just talk about the 2 pieces that you have here in the collection that are on exhibit. Yours is called Hidden Beauty, and Tim, yours is called Light Veil. So Dianne, can you start and just tell us a little something about the work, and because it's abstract, like what were your inspirations and what were you thinking in making that piece?
Well, I don't typically speak to a specific work of art. I speak to my practice and the materials I use, which then sort of trickles into the work of art itself. In my practice, I use discarded materials, things that are unexpected, things that I would ordinarily throw away. The title Hidden Beauty is exactly on the nose, I think, to a certain degree. I use materials that there is a hidden beauty in them. So these are things that you wouldn't ordinarily think as traditional art materials. That piece is made of my old t-shirts and string and rope and the inside of a box. I think there was like some sort of technology I got, but the foam. And the idea behind that is just taking a little and turning it into a lot which is sort of a practice, I think, for most people of the African diaspora, where being able to transform items into magnificent things, and that is reminiscent of my childhood, growing up between the South Bronx and Belize, where something I coined newly assigned value was really important, where we were able to take very minute or very simple things and make the most important things. Like, for example, a gourd in the yard in Belize would become like a scoop or a bowl. And that is something that's very instrumental and very much needed in the kitchen in Belize. So that's
And in the Bronx, we have the blue Danish cookie can.
Right, and the blue Danish, exactly. And that also extends to, you know, being able to pass things down that couldn't fit me to my younger cousin, or, you know, or what I don't need or my mother didn't need goes to a neighbor. This idea of community. And Hidden Beauty also speaks to my love of Black women. For so long, our beauty was hidden but not really hidden. So it also speaks to that.
Tim, can you tell us a little bit about your work?
Yeah, sure. So my piece is called Light Veil. I did it in 2007, and this is another one of those things where it speaks to my practice, where it exists. It's a painting that kind of has an image that exists like in between places. I like exploring ideas that and images that are neither here nor there. So it can be a light that's coming over a mysterious dark area, or it could be where something is being revealed, you know, from this mysterious area that's in the background. It's almost like a landscape. So yeah, that's.
No, I love that. I love that you said, I think it's in your artist statement, you said, the subject of my curiosity is the residual byproducts of human activity. So I wanted to know, like, what does that really mean? Because it's so poetic, it's beautiful, but what does that really mean?
Thank you. Yeah, so what that means for me in my practice is that a lot of my work, even though it's very abstract, it's built off of observation. You know, it's built off of the world around me. It doesn't always refer to any specific place, but I'm always channeling things that I see, things that I feel because of that. So there's always this, I forgot where I was going to go with that, but.
Well, I think, I mean, what I'm hearing is like, so what you're saying is like, it's just some of your lived experience.
Yeah, exactly. So and for example, just walking around, you know, we walk past areas in the city all the time, and there happens to be what I call, you know, unintentional art making in the streets, where someone will throw up a tag or graffiti or something like that, someone will buff it out, someone will tag over that, and then a poster will go up, and then someone starts ripping at the edges of all this, and we don't always know who's doing what in that situation. But all these lives are coming together in these spaces, and we don't always notice that. You know, we're always sort of like passing by. But I happen to like walking around, and I take a lot of photographs. I have an ongoing series called Daily Observations, and I take photographs of like the utility lines that are strewn on the streets and how they interact with the sidewalk. And other things, you know, like that. So, and there's all these spaces. Again, this to me feeds into this sort of in-betweenness, where it's an unsettled sort of space, and I tend to channel that into my work.
I love that.
Yeah, that's
what's your subject of curiosity?
Well, as I summed up, it is about the sum of my lived experiences, but to just talk about what you just said, Tim, it made me think of call and response.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You know, there is a conversation that's happening in cities among things that we don't always intersect and connect, right? But that is very much what you just expressed, this idea of call and response. Because, you know, when someone puts something in the public realm, nature is doing something to it.
Right.
And then the public is doing something to it. And then if the artist chooses to come back, they are also doing something to it. So there's this constant dialogue between the aesthetics around us
Yeah, and that's another thing about, and call and response is one of those things that happens in my work, because my work isn't thought out, isn't planned out. So I'll start with, maybe a color. I'll start with a general idea. I know what kind of forms I'm going to use, but I don't know where I'm going to wind up. It's always a journey that's happening, and that's, for me, it's mostly about that journey, getting from point A to point B, and then stopping somewhere. Watching me paint sometimes is almost like watching grass grow, because I'll start, kind of fast, but then as I go along, there's more looking and thinking. So it's like, the further along I get, it might be like 15 minutes of me like standing back, just staring at this thing from different angles, just to seeing, what's happening.
But what both of you are talking about, call and response, and you said something, using what's around you and making something more than what it is, that's steeped in Black culture. That is right. Blackness, right? So as abstract as your work is, it's still very much steeped in the experience of the Black experience, call and response in the church. Like, it's like, I guess, a preacher's sermon. Like, we never know where it's going to go.
Right.
It's that kind of tempo.
But there's always, the sermon can go like this, but there's always a point where a skilled pastor, if you will, knows how to make those connections and bring it back home.
Yes,
and that's very much what an artist is doing, right? So
I was about to say, I love where you're going, because I was about to say that's where artists is going. I think there's a misconception about where abstract artists go. Like, you don't know where you're going. You're meandering. And maybe you are, but there's almost a stigma attached to that. So I was going to ask you, I'm glad do you like being called an abstract artist? Do you like being called a Black artist, or none of the above?
See, why you gonna go there?
I mean, we just...
Well, let's just deal with this conversation surrounding being called a Black artist. Have y'all noticed I'm Black? Like, there is no getting, for me, I don't have an issue with that. And I always think about that essay that I can't remember the name of, that Langston Hughes wrote to the young poet who said he did not want to be known as a Black poet. And to summarize that essay, he said, if you don't want to be known as a Black poet, then you want to be white. And I think there's an issue with Black artists struggling with that, and that's due to systemic racism in our historical context in this country. But further than that, I think that leads to some identity crisis within us. Mm-hmm. Imagine not being an artist and having an identity crisis, right? Because we're Black in America. But then imagine being an artist, and then the canon of art history has historically been white. So this idea of being successful as an artist, then one has to not be a Black artist. Well, I'm here to tell you I am Black. I'm proud to be Black. I am a Black artist. I own it. I don't make any apologies for it, nor do I apologize for the work that I make that is deeply rooted in my Blackness.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Nice.
You would like, I'm like, right, drop the mic so much so I was like, wait. I wanted to ask both of you, and maybe Tim, if you want to follow up to that, does linking yourself to the Black community and to a Black collective, does it then potentially increase the value, increase the power, increase the extension of your work to a larger audience, or do you feel like it limits you and compromises you in the art world?
I can't speak for the art world.
No, just for you. Can you speak to, how does connecting yourself to the Black experience, though, within the art world, how does it impact how you navigate the art world?
Well, for myself, I don't feel like I'm limited by that at all. The greater art world has had its issues, but I know when I was younger, I was very much against being pigeonholed into the traditional realms that Black artists are usually, pigeonholed into from the outside.
Talk about that. What?
It's just the experience of, it's the experience. The experience of being Black is so vast, and it goes beyond, the struggle, the sacrifice, it goes beyond the church. But I mean, all of that is deeply important to us, you know. But at the same time, there were forces outside who, you know, were sort of like saying, well, you're Black, so you must be making art about, you know, struggle, about everything, about this, yeah, the church and everything else. And I'm like, well, no, that's not all of who we are, you know what I mean? And the other part of it is that for myself, I was looking for ways of expressing myself that went beyond, you know, what I saw, you know, necessarily. I ventured into the realm of, you know, wider ideas, and also a multiplicity of influences, you know, from music, writing, science, what have you. So all of these things, you know, come into the stew that, you know, makes my art.
When I was, it was in my bio, but I know my bio was long, but I interned for a brief minute at The Cosby Show. It was my first time seeing how powerful Black art can be in a home setting, and how it was tied to a certain class, right, and signified wealth. And that painting was the funeral procession. And so I thought, for me, at 17, I was in high school, to me, that is what art looked like. That's what art could be. I would never think that what you were doing at that point was considered art. And so I'm always, I think my mind is blown that you found abstract art. Like, how did that even come to you particularly? I mean, I think we're all about the same age when at that time, we're talking like the late 80s, that figurative kind of specific type of art was so prevalent. And I think I would probably, you know, maybe you can challenge me on this. I feel like there was an emphasis on painting that kind of art. Like, how did you find a way to break out of that and create what I feel is like even more radical and more imaginative?
Well, there are a couple of things. I want to just address one thing before we move on. The notion that as Black artists, we have to constantly explain being a Black artist is problematic in itself.
Yeah.
White people make art about being white every day, and nobody asks them, how does it feel to be a white artist? No one asks them, what is it like to be white? Right. No one asks those questions. Yeah. So that in itself, I think, should challenge us to think about where we are, that in 2023, that is still a question that needs to be asked for various reasons, right? That is even a question that is even formulated. I just had to say that.
and white artists aren't described as white artists.
That's right, right.
You know what I mean?
Artists,
they're just their name, and that's it.
That's exactly my point when I say that they make work about being white every day and nobody asks them a darn thing, right? Because it's about their lived experience. Now, in terms of that era that you're speaking of, that was one of the first times, and I often talk about this, where this idea of living with aesthetics in your home. Now, Black people have been doing this in various ways all along for centuries, right? Yeah. But again, from a class perspective, this is the first time that we see it, where we have a doctor and a lawyer and kids in school and they're doing well, a beautiful home, and it's shown to the world in this way. Yeah. This is the first time. So I remember that right on the heels of that, in a neighborhood like Harlem, all up and down 125th Street, we started to see, a myriad of prints and reproductions of art reflective of Black life, which was extremely important. But then that was rubbed against, you know, the idea of collecting and what that really means, and collecting something of value, and there was also exploitation in that need for representation. Exploitation in the sense that you went to a frame shop and you got a print that cost $100, but then the framer charged you $800 to $1,200 to frame it, right? Because you're going for the aesthetic. And then when you have a naive collector, they don't understand that it is exploitive, right? And it's just another form of, you know, all the things that happen that I won't go down the rabbit hole with. But it is a fact, right? And this is the first time that we're seeing it. So on one hand, I applauded all of this imagery, but then what did it mean for Black artists? Now, this was also at the time of the Black Fine Arts Show in the Puck Building. So now you're finally seeing all of this really great work by master artists, some of which are on the walls here today, like Doc Thrash and Sam Gilliam and, Benny Andrews, and the list goes on, that you saw at the Black Fine Art Show. And some of these works were the first time that you were seeing them live outside of a textbook, because you didn't see them in the museums. I studied art history extensively throughout my life. The only abstractionists I saw in the museums were dead white men. So I didn't have a profound connectedness to abstraction. And when I started painting, it was purely by accident. But what I did know, the first abstraction I painted, I knew it was done. I called my then mentor and I was like, there's paint on the canvas, there's color, and I know I'm finished. I couldn't tell you nothing else. That was my first abstraction. And then I started to, at that point, learn that Norman Lewis existed, that Alma Thomas existed, that Sam Gilliam, Richard Mayhew, and the list goes on, Ed Clark. I mean, the list goes on, Nanette Carter. It just goes on and on and on. I was like, where have these artists been? Yeah. They were never in the canon of art history all of the years that I've studied it.
Exactly right.
We've moved into a new space because of globalization, right? So it has opened up the world. I remember some years back, a friend of mine was taking an appraisal course at NYU, and they asked, well, what is she working on? And she said Black art, and they were like, well, what's that? It didn't dawn on them, because there was a question of not only aesthetic value but intellectual value, and then there was the monetary value that was questioned when it came to work by Black people. Now, if a white person painted a Black person, now it was great, but if we did it, there was some question in all of those spaces and ways.
Interesting. Did you want to add to that?
No, I just remember what you were talking, not what you were talking about, but in reference to like Norman Lewis's experience, being, he was around, he was painting largely during the abstract expressionist era, and his work was completely devalued.
Well, actually, Norman Lewis was the only Black man that you saw in photos during that time with Motherwell, right, de Kooning, Pollock, Clifford Still, was Norman Lewis. There was always one Black man in the back, and it was Norman Lewis. That was it.
And Basquiat.
Well, that was a different era and a different movement. We're talking specifically about the abstract expressionist movement. Okay. Even like a few years ago, the Jewish Museum here in New York did an exhibition with Lee Krasner and Norman Lewis, and they were talking about the two artists that were marginalized during that black expressionist, abstract expressionist time. And the idea that there were women and Black men, never mind the fact that they left out Black women, but I digress. But this is, as we come into later times, these conversations are surfacing.
All of that just reminded me of a quote that I'm about to read that Greg Tate, he wrote this, I think it's a pretty famous essay around Basquiat, but it was also about abstract art. And he says, he wrote this in 1989, so I think that's like 30-something years ago. He said, no area of modern intellectual life has been more resistant to recognizing and authorizing people of color than the world of the serious visual arts. To this day, it remains a bastion of white supremacy, a sconce of the wealthy, whose high-walled barricades are matched only by Wall Street and the White House, and whose exclusionary practices are enforced 24/7, 365. It is easier for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven than for a Black abstract and/or conceptual artist to get a one-woman show in Lower Manhattan or feature in the pages of Art Forum, Art in America, or the Village Voice. The prospect that such an artist would become a bona fide art world celebrity, and at the beginning of her career no less, was, until the advent of Jean-Michel Basquiat, something of a joke. And I was struck by that because it still feels very, the gatekeeping is still very prominent within, particularly for abstract artists. Yes, we're seeing a revival, like Alma Thomas is another one, like we're seeing bits and pieces, but it still seems like that the gatekeeping is still there and there's a barricade, particularly for artists that are creating abstract and conceptual work. I wanted to know what have been your experiences, and the question is, so is it really important to be in those institutions to get through that gate, or are you finding ways to create your own pathways and your own gates? Not necessarily for a Black MoMA, but what is your Black MoMA? What is your avenue of like pleasure and success and validation?
Would you like me
Go
to? Well, I mean, for me, I think what I'm hearing in there somewhere is about agency. The agency for me is the ability to create what I want, how I want, and making no apologies for it and asking no permissions for it. So whether I am in a collection, a museum, a gallery, whatever, I know that the work will authentically be me, and it will never be created to fit into some paradigm.
So you don't even think about where the art is going?
I don't think about where the work is going. I think about what it is I want to make and how I want to make it. And because I work in so many mediums, and it's not always that I'm proficient in said medium, it's just that I know I have something to say, and I find the best way to say it.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I do what I need to do. You know, I've been involved with the gallery that I'm involved with in Philadelphia for almost 21 years now, and I've never had an issue. We've never had an issue where she's come to me and said, you know, so-and-so bought this piece, you know, we need to make, 10 more of these. We need, available or something like that. That's never been an issue. In fact, it was kind of interesting, like early on in my relationship, in my business relationship, there was a client of hers who wanted a piece that was, similar to one I had made like a year ago. He wanted a commissioned piece. And so this was early on, so I was like, I'm up to the challenge. I'd never done anything like this before, so I was like, I had never done a commission like that before. I will never do it again. At the end of that was my...
Because they basically want a reproduction.
Basically, yeah, you know what I mean? They wanted like a smaller version of a larger painting, and it was from a year ago. My mind space, my head was like in a whole other space at that point. I was making totally different work. But so I said, going forward, I'm happy to do commissions, but I need control over what it is. If they're coming to me for my work, then they're going to get my work. You know what I mean? If they want a certain size, great. If they want a couple colors, all right, great. You know what I mean? But beyond that, so the agency, what you're talking about. I've never felt a need, like if you walk in my studio, sometimes you might feel like you're looking at two different artists. In fact, I was looking at a photograph today that I was thinking about posting on Instagram, but I said I'm going to hold off on it because I'm in this period where I'm pulling out some things from a recent period of work. And it's going to, there's a couple of different things going on, and that's it. I just got to do the work. It doesn't matter. I got to go where the work takes me.
I like that.
Can we just address, I want to just clarify something. You said it's like two different artists. Mm-hmm. And I want you to think about something. You're, as someone who works in multiple mediums, think about how your hand is in the work. Mm-hmm. And there are artists that sometimes they create multiple things and it's like, who the heck are they? Right. If your hand is your hand. And
it is.
Right. Yeah. So I would guess, like, just the small amount of time I've spent getting to know your work, that your hand is probably in that.
There's a through line. Yeah. I've had people come over to the studio and they've looked at both, different periods of my work. And they're like, yeah, I can see you all the way through there.
Right, and so I just wanted to bring that to your attention because it gives the impression that you're like, yeah. And I know that that's not what you're doing.
No, absolutely, no, it's
when
not.
I was listening to it, as a matter of fact, especially, I mean, I hear it in both of you, but you sound very much like the graffiti artists of back in the day in the Bronx that would go around and use their environment, use the environment and the spiritual energy and the energy of the streets to create their work. So there could never be two exact pieces, because you're using the energy and forces around you to inspire you to create those pieces. When you do that and you're using your environment to create these pieces, and I know in your bio, in your artist statement, you talk a lot about connecting to your spirituality. Sorry, I wanted to, I'm losing my train of thought. Sorry about that.
It's all right, we're here for you.
Oh, I wanted to talk about the resistive nature of abstract art, because I think people miss that point when looking at abstract work. I think they just see it like, I could do that, it's just a scribble. I took somebody to see Basquiat and he was like, whatever, I could put a crown on something, it's nothing. But there is something so resistive. I think particularly like nowadays, you talked about social media. I think when we look at television, just even here recently with the murder of the man on the subway, Jordan Neely, we are overwhelmed and burdened with images of violence, of black on black violence, and white on black violence, of mass murders, of death. And I think that within your imagination, because I feel like abstraction more than any other form uses and hones and centers the black imagination, there is something resistive and radical and political about that. And I wanted you to speak on that specifically, because again, I feel like people think abstraction is just like you said, you threw some paint on a canvas and now you're gonna get $50,000 for it. And there's nothing in there that is radical, that is political. And I'm not saying every abstract work is, but I think in the works that we're talking about, the works that you two produce, there is definitely this agency and this radical politics to it.
I think for myself, the radical aspect of it comes in resisting the urge to make work that people will automatically, that they will automatically like, I guess.
No, that's exactly what I want. I didn't want you to say that, but that's what I feel. When I look at your work, I don't necessarily even know it's made by a black man, but when I find out it takes me out of this current state of, like I said, these mediated images that are so harsh and so demeaning and so sad, that it makes me feel there's freedom there. When I look at your work, there's freedom. The looping in your piece that's up here on the walls, the white loops, and using that space that way, it just feels like freedom.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, and color is another way. Like during like around 20, during the year to like 2020, that was really, as we all know, really intense time. And I felt I had a moment where, I was wondering if I was making the work that I should be making. You know what I mean? But I came around and to my integrity wouldn't let me to do something else. You know what I mean? I had to sit with my feelings and say to myself, let's say, well, I could attempt this other more directly political work, but is that really where where I want to come from in my work, and the thing. So I just came back to what felt right for me, which was very much, very, very abstract, and even though like. It came out in the work, like the torment and all the the grief and everything. It did come out. It just not in the way that people might expect it.
Okay,
you know what I mean? Because you look at the paintings I did then and the paintings that were reproduced in Shifting Time for me. They, to a certain degree, they do, but not really.
And you're talking about the grief of the pandemic and the Black
Lives
Matter
exactly.
movement.
All the the anxiety.
That's right.
That came out of that. Like every day, it was like something else was going on. You know what I mean? So yeah, I just feel like I just had to do what I did. I had to stand in my integrity and just keep making the work I feel like I needed to make.
Because you're creating work for yourself at the end of the day.
Yeah, right. Absolutely.
Right, I mean, every artist starts with the I, right, the ego, right? So the work is created through you, by you, and then once you create it, it does belong to the world. But I will say that, like everything else, in order for change to happen, there has to be multiple voices, right? And that is the same for art. If I think that the changes that we're looking for is not going to come through our politicians, it's going to come through our culture workers. The change is going to happen with the multiple voices of the artists and the multiple ways in which artists express themselves. And it's the movement of the brushstrokes, it's the power of the brushstrokes, it's the layering of the color, it's the spatial relationship to color, it's the spatial relationships to those brushstrokes that creates the language that you're expressing, right? And that brushstroke is going to be different whether or not you're in a moment of high-end grief or you're in a moment of joy. And that is going to be the same for color. And that is what happens with abstract expressionist work. For me, with my work, I sought to create work that, whether it was the end of a workday or experiencing something very tragic, one can immerse themselves and get lost into the work of art. It has an ethereal feeling, and that you can transpose yourself from the now into any other place. And I was explaining that to someone, and they brought up Afrofuturism, that idea of living in the past, the present, and the future. And for me, that is how I think about my work. And many of the works that I see, one of the things as Afrofuturist. Right, as I walked through the gallery tonight, the thing for me that brought me joy, and then there's joy, right? In the act of making, let's not forget, for the artist, there is joy. And for the act of looking at art, there is joy. And it gave me great joy to walk through the gallery tonight and see the multiple language of color, of form, of shape, of figure, of brushstrokes, of medium. That for me is a place of respite from all of the things that you're talking about, all of the trauma porn that we're inundated with daily, moment to moment. These are the moments that I can appreciate life. I can appreciate being here and being in this space and in this body. Because the important thing with all that we are exposed to is to not be swallowed up by it.
That's right.
Exactly. And how do we not be swallowed up by it is by experiencing art and being in creative spaces and filling our lives and our souls with music and dance and art. That's how we do that.
I was
go ahead.
Sorry. No, that's okay. I was also gonna say that the act of continuing to make the work, that was really important for me as well, because I felt like if I put down my paintbrushes or whatever else I was doing, which is okay, but I felt like even in that moment of like great anxiety or whatever, if I had like decided to like stop making or whatever, I felt like I would have been failing other like future generations.
Wow.
Absolutely.
I was about to ask you, both of you are talking about values that have no monetary value. You're talking about joy, and we're talking about agency, and we're talking about community. None of these things are going to pay the bill. So during the pandemic, and even after, how hard, or has it been easier for you to continue to be an artist?
For me, I want to address that for a minute. I think, in a sense, to not be in a place of wholeness does take away from you being able to eat, right? I mean, let's be clear.
The artists in the room were like, yes.
And I just want to go back to something in terms of thinking about 2020 and specifically, I remember the night of the George Floyd incident. It happened and I was just like overwhelmed and I didn't know what else to do, so I made work. And I made a video where I took out all of the images of what we were watching and I just left the sound and flashes of white text.
Wow.
And the video was called, I think, 7 minutes, because that was around the time where you saw the life left. And the reason why I did it that way is because I feel some sort of responsibility, because as much as I talk about joy and all of these things, I do address some of the hard issues. And I think it's my responsibility as an artist to do so, but also to do so thinking about people who look like me. And there's a level of caretaking that I want to do. And so to remove those images that was constantly playing, and that's the trauma porn, and people were getting desensitized. And many people saw that video, and what it did was it made them stop and think about what was actually happening. It was arresting. So that was one way I dealt with that moment in time, and I continued to make work during the two pandemics.
Right.
I continued to make work, and again, I felt it my duty and responsibility, and I continued to do public speaking engagements and talks and panels, particularly surrounding the idea of wash your hands and how presumptuous and elitist that statement was. Because there are people in New York City living without adequate plumbing. Right. And so to simply say, wash your hands was making some assumptions. You know,
Yes.
When people, it was just that winter where busted pipes in housing developments kept people from having access to clean water in New York City.
Right.
And to flippantly say, wash your hands.
Right. I know, exactly. I'm about to open it up for Q&A, so get your questions together and start formulating. I have one last question that I wanted to ask both of you. There's this obviously nonstop chatter about AI. And particularly like when I look online now on social media, I see so many quote unquote, I'm using quotes here to talk about Afrofuturistic images of Black people that AI are creating. And it's like a Black woman or a Black man, and she has yellow hair and maybe like fruit for jewelry and bright colored clothing. And I'm like, this is what Afrofuturism is? This is what AI is creating? It almost makes me not want to use the word Afrofuturism, but it terrifies me because I feel like this is going to be what people are creating, and this is going to represent this new abstraction of art, and it's going to represent Black art. And it's not even Black creators that are creating a lot of the AI images you see of Black people, of Black art now. They're like, the two that I've seen are white men creating these images, and it's terrifying to me, and I don't know if I'm the only one who has that sentiment. Do you also feel terrified, or are you pretty unbothered by it all?
Yeah, the images I've seen, yeah. I feel like, just like you were just saying, I feel like there's going to be people who take that because of the nature of social media and because of people's attention spans, and because people don't, by and large, I say people, I think a lot of us don't pay attention to what's going on, even like on the screens in front of us. We take it all in, we're constantly consuming. And there's a generation of like kids or, younger people who are, looking at this, and that's going to be their touchstone. It's not going to be the only thing, but largely, we have a couple of generations now that are digital natives, and who are not like necessary, who haven't had a whole lot of experience with the greater world. So they're going to take that as their touchstone.
Exactly, because if you would know that that's Maasai, or you would see that in East Africa, and you would already know that in Haiti we're already rocking, bright colored clothing and mangoes for necklaces. So
yeah, I mean, for me, my concern is less from an artist perspective and more from this idea of another space of ownership.
Okay.
And this idea of ownership and control over us and our representation. So my concern, I guess, is be more socio-political.
No, that's totally valid, right?
Than anything, because as I continue to go into spaces and see work like this, for me that counters that whole AI world. I am more concerned with who gets to dictate who we are.
For sure, because at the end of the day, now you're talking dollars and cents.
And now you're talking dollars and cents.
Happen, right?
Particularly, like one of the AI, there's a white male who's booking Black models and getting top dollars using AI Black models. And he's booking these models, doing virtual fashion shows.
On that note, I'm opening the room and the floor up to questions from our audience. But first of all, let's give Tim and Dianne a hand. Does anyone have any questions?
So you mentioned that you're having difficulty in the middle of your talk. You said you had difficulty getting into museum collections. What was that the phrase? Like, walk me back to that comment, that period of the commentary. Were you having difficulty getting collected by museums and having demonstration museums because of the subject matter or because of who the artists are? Are you feeling that in this current time?
I think that was a question Nicole asked, so I didn't actually say that, but I can kind of speak to that. I think what happens for a lot of Black artists, and let's start with artists in general, but particularly Black artists, right? There's a certain pedigree one should have. What school you go to, where'd you graduate from, how long did you graduate, what kind of work you're making, who have you shown with. All of those things are things that people take into consideration, or whether or not mainstream art world says you are one of the chosen, right? So if your name is on that list of chosen, so then you will probably get a seat at the table and entered into a particular gallery. But if you're an artist that is finding your own way and navigating the art world on your own and trying to figure it out, you're not gonna readily, if the New York Times ain't necessarily write about you, you ain't in art in America, or if so-and-so didn't co-sign you, you're not necessarily going to be invited into particular galleries and museums. It's just a reality. It's not one that I have constructed, right? It is what the truth is.
And it's very different than even like I used to work in the music business where, especially with technology now, if you put a great, song on social media, on Instagram or TikTok, you can get a deal and you can get power and you can gain affluence. It doesn't work that way, it seems like, with art.
I think it's very rare that it translates the same way in art. You have unsung makers that is, Ed Clark died a few years ago and he was just getting, I don't remember now if his solo exhibition was right before he passed or right after, but he was just getting that kind of recognition, right? Mm-hmm. That all the other abstractions, I remember reading the crediting of using the large brushstrokes, the sweeps, was credited to a white artist, but that was Ed Clark's thing. Ed Clark started that. So this is a long history of this kind of thinking in terms of makers of color.
Black artists.
Yeah, Black artists, and it's shifting a bit because there are more curators in spaces now than they have ever been. There are more Black curators in very recognizable and powerful institutions than there ever been. There are more Black dealers in galleries now. It's changing. But when you look at the canon of art and art history, and even those small changes, we still here.
Don't you think it's still also?
Wait a minute, hang on. Is this a question?
Well, I'm just adding to what she was saying. I was going to ask, do you feel like it's artists out who have not been trained that's getting a lot of recognition and those ladders to step up and be in this sort of, places that you would never see 20 years ago because they would say, wow, who is this artist? We haven't seen you. You haven't been trained. You didn't go to school.
I don't know that I could speak specifically to an artist that hasn't gone to a particular school, but also you take into consideration that people also look at even a degree. So some artists may have a degree in architecture, but not in fine art, right? But they may have gone to a really good school. And so that's also a space that elevates their practice and their career, right? I don't know about, I would be hard pressed to think that today still, that an artist, you know, that was sitting in their room just tomorrow, they're like, oh, we're at the MoMA. I would be hard pressed to believe that to be
that would have happened back in the day more
Right.
so than now.
Right, I would be. I would be, but I will say this though, because we live in a world where optics and quick things are important. I have seen where a young artist who is 13 years old, and they made this big painting, and then all of a sudden everybody wants to pay them $50,000, you know, because it's a good look and it's a cute thing, and you know, I've seen that happen. That is true, but understand that everything is nuanced, right? Everything has these little, you know, nuanced, and nothing is like this, right? And particularly now, because we're living in a world where things are up and down. Right now, we're in a space where representational art is like the thing, right? I mean, when I entered into this space, it was abstraction. And all the figurative artists were like, I'm an abstractionist. I'm like, I ain't never seen you paint an abstract thing in my life. But, so it just goes like this. And that's why I can't focus on
Right, what's happening outside. Well, thank you everyone so much for joining us today and for your great questions. And thank you again, Dianne and Tim, for all that you have said today.
Thank you again. Thank you so much for coming tonight. I know you think it was a fantastic conversation, and please keep up the conversation after this and have a glass of wine. We have more of these kinds of conversations tomorrow night, Thursday night, and Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday next week at 6 o'clock. Thank you again.